My children sold my farm. While I was in rehab, they forgot whose name was still on the deed. The snow had started before dawn, soft and steady, the kind that muffles every sound and turns the world into a whisper. I had been stirring a pot of soup, the smell of carrots and thyme filling the kitchen, when the sound of tires crunched up the driveway. Through the window, I saw the glint of a new SUV, black, spotless, expensive. My daughter Amy stepped out first, her red coat tight, her sunglasses reflecting the gray sky. Kyle followed, phone in hand, already recording. I dried my hands on a towel and waited by the door. They did not knock. They walked in as if I had already ceased to live there. "Mom," Amy said, voice smooth and practiced, "this isn't healthy. You need help. We've arranged a place for you to rest." Her tone was the kind you use for a confused child. Kyle smiled, that half smirk he learned from business school, and added, "Rehab isn't a prison, Mom. Think of it as an upgrade." His phone's camera blinked red. "Day 1 of helping Mom heal," he said to the screen. "Let's get her back to her best self." I glanced at the lens and saw my reflection lined, pale, but still sharp. "You're filming?" I asked. Amy shrugged. "Transparency is healing, Mom. People like seeing families work through tough times." I looked around my kitchen, the same one Robert and I built 40 years ago, and realized they were staging my life like a documentary. Amy pulled papers from her bag. "It's just consent forms for your treatment. Standard stuff." The papers trembled slightly in her manicured hands. I took them, my eyes adjusting to the small print. Halfway down the second page, the words struck me. "Emergency Guardianship Authorization." I looked up. "You're signing for your own safety," Amy said quickly. "Don't be dramatic," Kyle muttered. "It's legal protocol, Mom. You've been forgetting things. We're protecting you." I almost laughed. Protecting, that was a new word for theft. I set the papers on the counter and traced Robert's initials carved in the wood from years ago. "You think I'm sick?" I asked. "Mom, we know you're tired," Amy said, softening. "You talk to yourself. You stay up all night watching the fields. This will help." Her voice cracked, not from care, but from impatience. I picked up the pen and signed. The ink bled a little on the cold paper. "If you think I'm sick," I said, handing it back, "then maybe I'll let the illness watch." Amy frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "you'll see." Kyle posted the video later that evening. I'm sure of it. I saw the reflection of the ring light in his window as they drove me away. The comments would say how kind my children were, how lucky I was to have family who cared. I wondered if any of those people had ever been saved against their will. I didn't protest. There was no point. When people have already written your story, silence frightens them more than rage. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. The drive to Lincoln was long. The snow turned into sheets of white noise against the windows. Amy talked the entire way about how modern therapy could restore my sense of purpose. Kyle kept adjusting the dashboard camera, narrating the trip like a road vlog. "She's been isolated too long," he said, his voice practiced and smooth. "We just want to make sure she gets the care she needs." I stared out the window at the frozen cornfields and thought how easy it was for people to use love as a disguise for shame. They were ashamed of me, of my boots, my cracked hands, my slow words. They wanted to turn me into content they could control. When we arrived at Silver Pines Recovery Center, the air smelled like bleach and lavender. A nurse in pink scrubs met us at the door. Amy handed her the papers with a relieved sigh, as if she had completed a transaction. "She's been disoriented," Amy said, lowering her voice. "Please make sure she rests." The nurse nodded. Kyle gave me a hug for the camera. "Smile, Mom. You're going to be better in no time." His breath smelled faintly of coffee and victory. Inside, the walls were painted a soft beige, the kind that erases color from memory. I was shown to a room with a single bed, a small table, and a window overlooking the snow. My bag had been packed by Amy, only clothes she approved of, nothing personal. Not a single photo of Robert, Not a letter, not even my old work gloves. It was as if they meant to replace me entirely. The nurse closed the door and left me sitting on the bed, papers in hand. I read the fine print again under the fluorescent light. Temporary guardianship until patient is deemed competent. That was the phrase. They had found a way to make me disappear legally. I leaned back and breathed, slow and steady. Fear didn't help. I had learned that from years of droughts and broken harvests. Panic dries the soil faster. I looked out the window at the white fields beyond the glass. The land never panicked. It waited. So would I. That night, I heard footsteps in the hall, voices muffled through the thin walls. Someone was crying in the next room, a low, desperate sound that reminded me of cows during calving season pain, mixed with surrender. I thought of Amy's face, the way she avoided looking me in the eye when I signed. Guilt, maybe, or fear that I might still see her clearly. Kyle's eyes had been worse bright with excitement, the kind of shine people get when they believe they've finally beaten something older than themselves. I folded the papers carefully and slid them under the mattress. They thought they had taken my control, but they hadn't taken my awareness. In the quiet of that sterile room, I made a promise to myself. I would find out what they wanted and take it back. The snow outside thickened, wind rising against the windows. It sounded almost like applause, slow, deliberate, cold. As the lights dimmed, I whispered to the dark, "You think this is my end, but I've survived worse storms than family." When morning came, I smiled at the nurse, ate the tasteless oatmeal they gave me, and pretended to be grateful. The performance had begun, but not the one they expected. They believed they had locked me away for my own good, but all they had done was put me in a place where I could watch them without being seen. They called it saving me. I called it Stage 1. When I first met Robert Carter, he had dirt under his fingernails and ideas too big for Nebraska. We built Carter Farm with our hands, 1 acre at a time, turning nothing but prairie and patience into something that breathed. In the early years, we joined a government pilot called Soil Sense ID, a project meant to give every piece of land a digital fingerprint. Robert believed that one day, technology and the soil would speak the same language. I believed in him. He called it the science of faith, because every seed, like every invention, began with hope and uncertainty. Back then, we didn't have algorithms or blockchain, just weather, patience, and a belief that honesty could feed people. When he died, the wind on this land changed. The laughter stopped echoing in the barn. I kept working because work was the only way to stop grief from taking root. The fields became quieter, the house colder, but the soil still waited for me each morning. That was enough. Amy never understood that kind of silence. From the time she was little, she hated the isolation of the plains, the mud, the smell of fertilizer, the endless horizon. When she turned 18, she left for the city and came back speaking in numbers, profits, markets, trends. The first time she mentioned selling the farm, I thought she was joking. "Mom," she said, "you could retire comfortably. The land's worth more than your lifetime of crops." I told her the land wasn't something to be sold. She laughed and said, "That's exactly why you're poor." Years passed, and every visit became shorter, sharper. She'd stand by the porch, arms crossed, phone in hand, as if counting the minutes she spent here. One summer, she said the words I'd always feared. "You chose the farm over us. Maybe it's time the farm chose someone else." I didn't answer because she was right. In one way I had chosen this life. But I had chosen it for them, for something to inherit that wasn't debt or emptiness. She never saw it that way. Kyle was different. He inherited Robert's curiosity, but not his restraint. After college, he founded a tech company called FarmTech AI, claiming it would revolutionize agriculture through automation and drone mapping. He came home last spring full of confidence and caffeine, showing me a tablet screen filled with graphs and simulations. "Look, Mom," he said, "AI can predict soil health, yield, even water flow. We could integrate Carter Farm into FarmTech's pilot. You'd be part of the future." I smiled and poured him coffee. "You think the land needs a computer to tell it how to breathe?" He laughed, thinking I was being sentimental. "It's not about replacing you, Mom. It's about scaling you. That word scaling sounded like sandpaper. A month later, Amy returned. They came together this time, united by ambition. They spread out documents on the kitchen table, the same table where Robert and I once planned crop rotations. Amy spoke first. This is a partnership agreement. You'll retain partial ownership, but FarmTech will handle management and sales. You can rest. I scanned the papers. Rest. That was the word they always used when they meant remove. My name was printed under limited shareholder. Robert's signature was faintly photocopied from an old deed. I looked at them both and asked, "Do you even know what this land remembers?" Amy rolled her eyes. "Mom, it's dirt. Valuable dirt. Stop turning everything into poetry." Kyle tried a gentler tone. "Think about legacy, Mom. We're trying to honor you." I put the papers down carefully. "Then honor me by listening." They didn't. Amy's voice rose. "You're being unreasonable. We're offering you freedom." "I have it already," I said. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to split the air. Amy's face tightened, her jaw twitching with frustration. "You can't keep living like this. Someone has to protect you from yourself." She said it with pity, but it sounded like a threat, and maybe it was. Kyle looked at her, unsure whether to agree. He always followed her lead. He mistook confidence for truth. When they left that day, the sun had started to set behind the barn. The light fell across the furrows Robert once plowed, deep and straight. I stood there watching their car disappear down the gravel road, a line of dust chasing after them like an unfinished sentence. I thought about Amy's words, "protect you from yourself." They rang in my head as I locked the door. That was when I realized something had shifted. They weren't just planning to sell the farm anymore. They were planning to save me. And salvation, in the mouths of the greedy, is just another word for control. I went to the field, pressed my hands into the cold earth, and whispered, "They've forgotten whose name is still on you." The soil didn't answer, but I could feel it breathe beneath my fingers, patient and alive. Some roots, I thought, don't die. They just wait for the next storm. Silver pines smelled like citrus disinfectant and quiet despair. Everything gleamed too clean, as if someone were trying to scrub out the truth. The walls were green, soft and quiet, but still a cage. They gave me a plastic bracelet with my name misspelled and a schedule of wellness activities, meditation, journaling, group therapy. I read it once, folded it neatly, and slipped it under my pillow. The other residents shuffled through the halls like ghosts wearing borrowed smiles. One woman used to own 3 hotels in Kansas, another had been a retired judge. They whispered their stories to me in fragments over dinner, all different but the same: children, signatures, disappearances. "My son said it was temporary," the judge told me. Then he sold the house. Each of us had been declared unfit in the language of love. I didn't speak much that first week. I listened. Silence is the only weapon that still works when people think you're harmless. That's how Jenna noticed me. She was 25, maybe younger, with freckles that refused to hide under her mask. A psychology intern, polite, observant. She brought me tea during the afternoon recovery circle, where residents were supposed to talk about their addictions. When it was my turn, I said simply, "I'm addicted to the truth." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that said she understood too much. Later that evening, she found me in the library pretending to read. "Mrs. Carter," she whispered, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "I checked your chart. You don't have any medical diagnosis that fits here." "I'm aware," I said. She hesitated. "Your kids filed an emergency guardianship order. They control your accounts, property, and medical decisions. The facility's billing goes directly to them." I took a sip of my cold tea. "Then I suppose I'll need to be a very difficult patient." Her eyes widened. "You're not surprised?" "I raised those two," I said. "They've always believed control is a form of care." That night, Jenna came to my room after rounds, holding a small tablet hidden under a folder. "I shouldn't be showing you this," she whispered, "but you deserve to know what they're doing." The screen glowed blue in the dark. She had logged into the county property registry using credentials from a patient rights database. "Look," she said, pointing to a transaction ID beside my name. 3 days ago, ownership of Carter Farm was transferred to something called FarmTech AI Holdings. My heart didn't race, it slowed, cold, steady. Under my signature? Yes, and she opened another tab. There's a video file attached as consent verification. Watch. I did. There I was, my face, my voice, sitting at my own kitchen table, saying words I had never spoken. I, Martha L. Carter, authorized the sale of Carter Farm to FarmTech AI Holdings. The mimicry was perfect, the tilt of my head, the sound of my breath, even the way my glasses caught light. But my eyes, they were wrong. Too empty. I looked like a puppet blinking on command. Jenna swallowed hard. It's a deep fake. Synthetic footage created using your old interviews and public photos. Someone fed it into an AI generator and used it for digital notarization. I replayed the clip twice, then a third time, watching how I signed the paper with a hand that trembled just enough to look real. They cloned my face to bury my name. But roots don't die when you cut their shadows, I murmured. Jenna looked at me as if she didn't know whether to cry or run. We can report this, she said, but we'll need proof of forgery, metadata, the original deed, anything. I met her eyes. Then we'll start digging. Lucky for them, I've always been good with soil. She smiled faintly at that, not understanding the weight behind my words. She promised to help me access my old emails, and by the next morning, she had smuggled in a laptop from the staff office. We worked quietly, pretending to do crossword puzzles while the others napped. Inside my inbox, I found forwarded copies of messages I'd never sent, transaction approvals, legal notifications, a digital signature certificate tied to an IP address that wasn't mine, Amy's corporate email, Kyle's startup domain. The pieces fit too neatly to be coincidence. I leaned back, staring at the screen. They thought sending me here would erase the trail, but every digital fingerprint leads somewhere. Jenna nodded. We can trace it. If we gather enough, we can prove you're competent and expose what they did. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Good. Let's make them wish they'd chosen paper over pixels. Outside the window, the snow had stopped falling. For the first time, the sky looked clear. I watched my reflection in the glass, pale but steady, and whispered, They locked me inside their data vault, but I've survived deeper darkness than this. I had always believed the best revenge was competence. Not anger, not shouting, just being sharper than the people who thought they'd outsmarted you. And after Jenna showed me what my children had done, the old gears in my mind started turning again. The same ones that had built Carter Farm, the same ones Robert once said could outcalculate a storm. We began our work at night, after the halls of Silver Pines fell quiet and the nurses turned off the hallway lights. Jenna smuggled her laptop into my room under a stack of psychology case studies. We sat shoulder to shoulder on my narrow bed, the screen's glow bouncing off the white walls. There's someone who can help, I said, scrolling through my mental catalog of the past. Frank Dawson, my husband's attorney. He handled the original land deed. She raised an eyebrow. Would he even still have those files? Frank doesn't throw things away, I said. That's why he's still useful. The next morning, Jenna arranged a call under the guise of family contact therapy. She placed the phone in my hand, pretending to monitor me while I reconnected with old friends. When Frank answered, his voice was gravelly but familiar, like an old engine that still started on the first turn. Martha Carter, he said, half laughing. I thought you were off saving the world or teaching the soil to sing. Not quite, I said. I'm in a place where they call lies treatment and theft rehabilitation. I need your help, Frank. He grew quiet. What did Amy and Kyle do? They sold Carter Farm, using a deepfake of me. Frank cursed under his breath. You always raised them too smart for their own good. I smiled faintly. I raised them honest. The rest was their choice. He rummaged through something on his end papers, drawers, the rustle of time being disturbed. I've still got the original contract from 1978, he said finally. You and Robert were careful. There's a clause dual signature for sale. Both owners' consent required, no exceptions. Good, I said. Then it's time to make that clause mean something again. Jenna leaned forward, whispering, "What's your plan?" "We're going to teach them how truth works," I said. Frank drafted a new document that afternoon, the Carter Agricultural Trust. It was simple but ironclad. All land and data assets under my ownership, including Soil Sense ID credentials, would be transferred to a national blockchain registry. I would hold the only private access key. The moment the trust activated, every transaction tied to Carter Farm would require my digital authorization. "Blockchain?" Jenna said, half smiling. "You're using tech to fight tech?" "Robert used to say you can't fight a flood with a bucket," I replied. "You divert the water." It took 3 days to finalize everything. Frank couriered the papers to me disguised as rehabilitation materials. I signed them with steady hands. Once the trust went live, the land was no longer a set of fields. It was data, living and immutable, stored in a place greed couldn't reach. While that was happening, Jenna was busy setting another trap. Using her access to the facility's call logs, she recorded a phone conversation between Amy and Kyle that took place on speakerphone during one of their check-ins with the doctor. The recorder caught every word, clear and cruel. "Amy, once she's declared incompetent, the sale's final." Kyle, "And no one checks metadata on deepfake filings. The blockchain notarization covers it. It's airtight." Amy laughed. "She won't even know what hit her." When Jenna played it back for me, I didn't flinch. It was exactly what I needed. "Send a copy to Frank," I said. "Label it for later." She hesitated. "Shouldn't we report it now?" "Not yet," I said. "Let them finish their crime. Truth works better with proof." Frank called the next day. "Martha, you've just turned their scheme into a legal suicide note. Once the guardianship hearing happens, I'll file everything: contracts, call logs, even the trust registration. The moment they try to execute the sale, it'll trigger a fraud alert on the state network." I smiled, picturing Amy's face when her perfect plan collapsed under its own weight. "They think I'm too old to play their game," I said softly. "They've forgotten who wrote the rules." That night, I walked the empty corridor of Silver Pines, my footsteps quiet against the polished floor. In every room, I saw echoes of others like me, people silenced by love that had turned into ownership. But something was different now. The silence didn't feel like surrender anymore. It felt like waiting. I paused at the window, looking out at the moonlit snow. Somewhere beyond those fields, my children were celebrating their victory, confident that I was safely tucked away. I whispered to the glass, "Keep watching, Robert. The lesson's about to start." By the end of the week, the trap was set. The farm was locked behind my trust, the evidence archived in 3 different encrypted drives, and Frank was ready to strike when the time was right. I didn't need to shout or beg or fight. All I had to do was let time and arrogance do their work. They thought they had buried me in a quiet room full of soft lights and empty hours. What they didn't know was that I had turned the walls into mirrors. And soon, they'd see exactly what they had made reflected right back at them. When people believe they've won, they stop looking over their shoulder. That's the first rule of pride, and Amy had always been its most faithful student. 2 weeks after Frank finished setting up the Carter Agricultural Trust, FarmTech held a press conference in Omaha. Jenna found the live stream for me on her phone during my group mindfulness session. I sat quietly in the corner of the rec room, earbuds tucked under my gray hair, pretending to listen to breathing exercises while Amy and Kyle smiled for the cameras. The banner behind them read in sleek silver letters, "FarmTech AI acquires Carter Farm, $4.8 million deal to revolutionize American agriculture." The moderator introduced them as visionaries, uniting family tradition with innovation. Amy wore white, always white, when she wanted to look innocent. Kyle had that same nervous grin his father used to have when he'd just told a half-truth and hoped no one noticed. Amy leaned into the microphone. "Today marks the beginning of a new era. My mother's legacy will live on through us. FarmTech's acquisition of Carter Farm will allow us to merge tradition with cutting-edge AI soil mapping, creating sustainable solutions for the future." Applause. Flashbulbs. Smiles polished to perfection. Then came the questions. "Mrs. Blake," a reporter asked, "how does your mother feel about this? We understand she's recovering?" Amy gave that perfectly rehearsed laugh. "She's doing wonderfully. We've been in constant contact. This was always her dream to see the land evolve beyond its limits." It was almost funny. She was right about one thing. I was watching her dream. Jenna whispered beside me, "You're taking this really calmly." I smiled. They sold soil that wasn't theirs. Let's see how the roots respond. The video panned to Kyle, presenting slides about autonomous harvest prediction, data monetization, and ethical AI farming. The audience nodded along like disciples at a sermon. By the time the event ended, FarmTech's stock had jumped 12%. The next morning, the headlines came. FarmTech AI secures $4.8 million asset Carter Farm deal seals company's future. A daughter's promise, keeping family land alive through technology. Even the local paper printed it, complete with a photo of Amy holding up a pen as if she'd just signed history. In Silver Pines, I asked Jenna to hand me the morning paper. I circled the headline, folded the page neatly, and said, "Print that for evidence. It's going to look good in court." By noon, Amy and Kyle were at the bank, transferring funds, filing documents, celebrating with champagne. According to the press leaks, they'd already received a down payment from their investors, nearly $2 million. Amy gave a statement on live television, her voice trembling just enough to sound heartfelt. "My mother may not be here today, but she's the reason we can stand on this foundation. Her spirit built this farm. We're just giving it new life." When the journalist asked, "So, will she be involved in FarmTech's future?" Amy smiled with perfect sincerity. "Of course, she's always part of us." That was when the screen behind her flickered. At first, no one noticed. The FarmTech logo glitched, the colors bleeding into static. Then a small notification appeared on the display connected to their blockchain system, an error message, red and sharp. "Transfer failed. Carter Agricultural Trust. Verified owner Martha L. Carter." The sound in the room shifted, the kind of hush that falls when something sacred breaks. Amy frowned, trying to keep smiling. "It's just a minor system error," she said into the mic, but the audience had already begun murmuring. A second message appeared. "Property registry blocked. Legal owner confirmed under National Blockchain Authority." Kyle went pale. "Amy," he hissed, his microphone still live, "did you authorize a secondary trust key?" "What?" she snapped. "No, of course not." "Then how?" Before he could finish, the live stream cut abruptly to black. Jenna's phone buzzed with notifications, screenshots, news alerts, social media posts exploding with speculation. "FarmTech's press conference just crashed midstream," she said. "The comments are wild. People are saying the sale was fake." I leaned back in my chair. "Not fake," I said, "just premature." Frank called later that afternoon, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd waited 40 years for justice. "It worked, Martha." The system flagged the deed transfer as invalid. The trust verification bounced every transaction. Their investors are demanding audits, and the SEC's already sniffing around. "Good," I said softly. "Let the roots pull back what was stolen." By evening, the damage was global. The company's value plunged nearly 40% in a single trading session. News anchors debated the Carter Farm scandal. Analysts accused FarmTech of fraud, and social media lit up with clips of Amy's frozen smile before the broadcast cut. One user wrote, "Guess Mom's not dead after all." In Silver Pines, Jenna handed me her phone again. "Look at this," she said. The headline glowed on the screen. "FarmTech AI under investigation after blockchain fraud allegations ownership dispute emerges." Underneath was a photo of Amy leaving the conference, her hand shielding her face from cameras, Kyle trailing behind with a phone pressed to his ear. I watched quietly, then said, "They thought they could rewrite history, but history keeps receipts." Jenna grinned. "What are you going to do now?" "Nothing," I said. "The soil's already shifting. Gravity will take care of the rest." That night, snow fell heavy over Nebraska again, blanketing everything in silence. From my window, the world looked untouched, pure, unbroken, But beneath that white stillness, the ground was moving. The land was remembering whose name it carried. And somewhere, far away, Amy and Kyle were learning the lesson every betrayer learns too late. When you sell something rooted in love, the earth itself tilts to correct you. The courthouse in Lincoln smelled faintly of dust and coffee, old justice and nervous hands. I sat at the front, my cane resting against the polished oak bench, Frank beside me with a mountain of documents and a quiet fire in his eyes. Across the aisle, Amy and Kyle whispered with their lawyers, dressed in black suits that didn't quite hide the panic underneath. The cameras in the back of the room glinted like vultures. The headline had already spread across the country, "The woman Nebraska tried to delete." The clerk called it Carter versus Farm Tech Holdings. The name sounded strange out loud, like my family had been turned into a corporation. Frank rose first, steady and deliberate. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not simply about land. It is about identity, the theft of a woman's life through technology designed to mimic her. My client, Martha L. Carter, was declared incompetent without medical basis. Her property was sold through fabricated consent created by artificial intelligence. And today, we will show you that even machines cannot tell that kind of lie forever." Amy stared at me, her jaw clenched so tight the muscles in her cheek jumped. Kyle kept his eyes on the table, tapping his foot. Frank's first piece of evidence was simple, the original contract from 1978. He held it up, yellowed and fragile, like scripture. "Clause 14, he said. "Dual signature required for any sale of Carter Farm. This document alone invalidates the transfer." Amy's lawyer objected. "That's irrelevant. Mrs. Carter provided digital consent through notarized video." Frank smiled the way old wolves smile. "We'll get to that." He played the deepfake video on the screen. My counterfeit face filled the courtroom, blinking, smiling, speaking words I never said. "I, Martha Carter, authorize the sale." The fake me even adjusted her glasses. The room murmured. Then Frank opened the metadata file. Numbers, timestamps, code. He pointed with a pen. "Generated by FarmTech AI Studio, 97 seconds of frame synthesis, 87% AI composite probability. It's a forgery." The judge leaned forward. 87%? "Enough," Frank said, that even a basic verification algorithm flagged it. He clicked again. A robotic voice filled the room, flat and mechanical. Voice authenticity. Synthetic source detected. For a second, the courtroom was silent, then laughter rippled through the audience. Even the judge smiled. I turned slightly toward Amy and said softly, "Even machines know who tells the truth." Funny, isn't it? Technology finally learned morality before my own children did. Frank didn't stop there. He played the next, recording the call Jenna had captured. Amy's voice rang out, sharp and confident. "Once she's declared incompetent, the sale's final. We'll make her look unstable. No one checks metadata." Amy went pale. Her lawyer stood up, stammering about context and privacy violations, but the judge waved him off. "The context," Frank said calmly, "is greed." He placed one final folder on the table, the trust record from the National Blockchain Authority. "This," he said, "is the immutable ledger showing Mrs. Carter as verified owner of the Carter Agricultural Trust. Every attempted transaction after February 12 was automatically rejected by the system. There is no tampering, no deletion, no ambiguity. The land knew who it belonged to, even when her children forgot." The prosecutor, from the state's fraud division, nodded in quiet agreement. "We are pursuing charges of document falsification, unlawful guardianship, and cyber fraud." Amy buried her face in her hands. Kyle muttered something about just following orders, but the words didn't matter anymore. The truth had turned its own technology against them. When the verdict came, it felt less like thunder and more like sunrise. The judge's gavel struck once. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Martha L. Carter. The property transfer is null and void. FarmTech Holdings is hereby ordered into liquidation pending criminal investigation of fraudulent activities. Applause erupted, not the polite kind, but the wild human kind that breaks through years of silence. Reporters rushed for the door, already dictating their leads. I heard one of them say, "She beat them with their own machines." Frank leaned toward me. "You did it, Martha." I smiled faintly. "No, the truth did. I just made sure it had a lawyer." Outside, the courthouse steps were lined with cameras, microphones, and faces I didn't know. Someone shouted my name. Another asked how it felt to win. "It feels," I said, pausing for the right words, like the soil finally tilted back toward justice. By the time the sun set over Lincoln, farm tech stock had collapsed, investors fleeing like crows from a burning field. Amy and Kyle were no longer innovators or heirs, they were suspects. And I, just an old woman who refused to disappear, walked out into the Nebraska cold, knowing the ground beneath my feet still remembered my name. When the headlines faded, and the reporters moved on to newer scandals, the silence that followed felt almost sacred. Nebraska's wind carried the scent of thawing earth again, and for the first time in years, I could hear the land breathe. The snow had begun to melt, revealing the edges of my fields brown, stubborn, alive. The same soil that had outlasted droughts, wars, and greed had survived my children too. Amy didn't show up for sentencing. She didn't have to. The court of public opinion had already devoured her. Every platform that once praised her innovative leadership now replayed her arrogance frame by frame. They called her brilliant once. Now they called her viral for all the wrong reasons. Commentators labeled her the daughter who tried to deepfake her own mother. Sponsors pulled out, investors cut ties, and within a week, farm tech was nothing more than a cautionary tale buried under lawsuits. I saw her once after that. She was standing across the street from the courthouse, sunglasses hiding her swollen eyes, hair tied back like a stranger. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and couldn't face it. For a long moment, I felt something that wasn't anger or victory, just a small ache where love used to live. You can't unmake someone your child, no matter how deeply they wound you. Kyle came a few weeks later, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and guilt heavy enough to bend his shoulders. He stood by the gate of Carter Farm, hesitant. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking on that single word, "I don't expect forgiveness. I want to help." I studied him for a while. The same boy who used to chase grasshoppers down the rows of corn, now older, smaller somehow. "You sold my name," I said quietly, "but not my roots. Plant again, and maybe the soil will forgive you." He nodded, eyes shining with something like hope. The next morning, he was out in the fields before sunrise, hands deep in the cold ground, working silently. He never complained. And for the first time in years, I didn't have to work alone. Spring came early that year. The soil, as if sensing its reprieve, yielded easily. We rebuilt the greenhouse, repaired irrigation lines, even painted the old farmhouse a bright shade of cream. Neighbors who had avoided me during the scandal began stopping by again, some out of curiosity, others out of quiet admiration. The local news did a follow-up story titled, "The Farm That Refused to Be Sold." One afternoon, as I was sorting through soil samples, Jenna drove up the long dirt road in her beat-up blue truck. She still wore her Silver Pines badge clipped to her coat, though she'd left the facility months ago. "I heard about the reopening," she said, handing me a basket of fresh apples. "You didn't just win a case, Martha. You gave proof that truth doesn't age." I laughed softly. Neither does stubbornness, apparently. We sat on the porch drinking lemonade, watching Kyle in the distance as he fixed the fence line. The air was full of dust and sunlight. "What are you going to do now?" Jenna asked. "Something bigger than this farm," I said. That was how the Soil Truth Foundation began. With Frank's help and Jenna's persistence, we created an organization that would protect the elderly from digital fraud people like me who were tricked, manipulated, or erased through technology. We built a small office in town, right next to the library. The sign out front read, "Soil Truth Foundation, because justice deserves roots." On the day of its opening, the town mayor gave a speech, but no one remembered his words. They remembered mine. I stood at the podium, the microphone catching the tremor in my voice and the steadiness in my resolve. "Justice isn't noise," I said. It's not the roar of victory or the echo of revenge. It's the quiet sound of land remembering who owns it. It's the patience of truth, waiting for time to come around. The crowd was small. Neighbors, volunteers, journalists, and a few old farmers who had known Robert and me back when Carter Farm was just an idea. When I stepped down, Clara from the next county came up, tears in her eyes. "You made us all feel seen again," she whispered. That night, as the sun dipped low and turned the fields gold, I walked the perimeter of the farm. The soil felt warm beneath my boots. Kyle had just finished planting the new hybrid wheat, his idea, but done the old way, by hand. He joined me at the fence, wiping sweat from his brow. "You think it'll grow?" he asked. "It already has," I said, looking out at the horizon. "We just can't see it yet." The wind moved through the crops like a sigh, and for the first time I realized what peace actually sounded like. Not silence, not stillness, just the steady rhythm of life, beginning again, humble and whole. In town, they still talk about the lawsuit, about the woman who beat a company with a contract older than its founders. But that's not the story I tell. Mine is simpler. The land waited, I listened, and together, we remembered how to live. A year later, the Carter farm no longer looked like a battlefield. The fields stretched wide and green under the Nebraska sky, the wheat whispering in the wind like nothing bad had ever happened here. The scars were still there. Of course, old fences, weathered wood, and the ghosts of names whispered too harshly, but the land had forgiven faster than people ever could. That morning, the county officials arrived with their clipboards and cameras to hang the bronze plaque by the gate. Carter Farm, Registered Heritage Agricultural Site. A crowd had gathered: neighbors, volunteers from Soil Truth Foundation, a few reporters who had followed my story from the beginning. Even the mayor came, smiling like the victory belonged to him. Kyle stood beside me, his hands rough again from honest work. The new solar panels he'd installed shimmered above the barn, gleaming with quiet pride. Ironically, they were built from leftover parts of the old farm tech prototype, the last fragment of his betrayal, now turned into light. "It feels different this time," he said, squinting at the panels. "Like they're actually giving back instead of taking." I nodded. That's what happens when power finally knows its purpose. The reporters surrounded me before the ceremony began. The youngest one, barely older than my granddaughter, held out her recorder. "Mrs. Carter, after everything that's happened, do you regret trusting your children?" I laughed softly, the sound surprising even me. "Trust wasn't the mistake," I said. "Forgetting to make a backup was." They chuckled, not quite sure if I was joking. Maybe I wasn't. When the ribbon was cut, the crowd applauded. Sunlight hit the new metal sign at just the right angle, bouncing light across the letters. Carter Agricultural Trust, the land that remembers its owner. I ran my fingers over the engraving, cool and solid beneath my touch. The earth around the post was dark and rich, the smell of it filled the air like memory itself. Kyle came over, holding out a mason jar full of soil from the first field we'd reclaimed. "Thought you'd want to keep this," he said quietly. I took it from him, unscrewed the lid, and poured a handful into my palm. The dirt was fine, soft, clinging to the lines in my skin. I let it run between my fingers, watching how it caught the sunlight. Each grain glittered as if the land itself had learned to shine. "They tried to bury me in rehab," I said softly, "more to the ground than to anyone else. But I grow best underground." The cameraman lowered his lens, just for a second, as if he understood that the story had already told itself. Behind us, the panels hummed faintly, gathering sunlight, storing energy, sending it through the new system that powered not just the farmhouse, but the Soil Truth office in town. Everything came full circle. The technology that once stole my name now preserved it. Jenna was there too, taking notes for the foundation's next campaign. "We're calling it Project Rootlight," she said. "A scholarship for seniors to learn digital security. The motto's yours, by the way." I raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" She grinned. "The quiet sound of land remembering who owns it." As the crowd began to disperse, I walked alone to the far end of the field, where Robert and I had first planted corn 50 years ago. The sunlight was strong now, the kind that turns everything gold for a heartbeat before fading. I closed my eyes and listened the rustle of wheat, the steady hum of the panels, the low breath of the wind. For years, people had tried to erase me with paperwork, with lies, with the polite cruelty of progress. But here I was, standing on the same ground, older, slower, unbroken. The cameras caught the last image of the day, an old woman kneeling in the dirt, a handful of soil glittering like diamonds in her palm. Behind her, the sunlight bounced off the panels, flooding the fields in gold. Justice didn't roar that day, it simply glowed. And that, my dear friends, is how one old woman from Nebraska turned a so-called tragedy into a harvest of justice. They thought they could bury me under signatures and silence, but roots, just like truth, run deeper than paper. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that courage doesn't retire, hit that hype button and subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Together, we'll keep the voices of strength, memory, and quiet rebellion alive, because justice doesn't fade. It just waits for the right storyteller to bring it back to light.